Hey guys, what's going on? As part of my journey in this new world of DevOps and cloud, I wanted to cover this topic around JSON that I think is pretty important. In this video, we'll go over JQ, jmespath, and jsonpath. These are more like utilities or tools, but they can be very useful. What these three have in common is JSON. So let's get started with JSON and JQ and take it from there. Alright, I'm on my Ubuntu machine. Let me pull up my sample JSON file. This is what it looks like. It's simply a way of representing data. At its core, we have a name and value pair. So as you can see, the name, which is name, has a value of string, which is YouTube video, right? Hits is another object which has a value of 1000, which is an integer, and then you have another hits which has a value of null. So what I'm doing here is I have a collection of videos and I'm grouping it based on the type, the name, and the number of hits. So the YouTube videos have a name and they have the number of hits. Video on Udemy has a name with the number of hits. And the personal, which is sitting maybe on my personal computer, does not have any hits, so the hits is set to null. Right? Now these braces can be thought of as objects or dictionary. Dictionary is probably not the right word. It's strictly an object. On the other hand, when you see square brackets, think of it as an array. Videos is an array which has number of elements. The elements are objects. There you go. That was my 1-minute tutorial on JSON. Now that we have this data, we will use JQ, which is a utility, to pull information out of it. We could use Unix commands like sed, awk, cut, and so on, but this is not a tutorial on Unix. And besides, JQ was made for handling JSON data. So let's go with JQ. With JQ, the very first option you need to learn is the dot operator. The dot operator is called the identity operator or the pretty print operator. Let's try it. jq.sample.json. As you can see, it has formatted it to make it look better, and it has even added colors to it. Let me clear the screen. Now you know that videos is an array. To print the contents of the array, let's try this. Okay, maybe not very helpful, but let's try something else. I'll clear the screen again. And I'll print the very first element of the array. Since it's an array, it starts with index of 0. So there you go, that's my very first array. The second element is this. If you want to print all the elements, just specify the opening and closing bracket. This is used to dereference the array. And these are the contents. Let's keep going. I'll clear the screen. If we want to display only the personal videos, we would do this. What we are doing here is we are dereferencing the array and we are selecting type that contains personal. And there you go. These are the 3 entries of type personal. We can drill down even further. Let's say we want to display the video with the name of my video. Alright, all I'm doing here is adding another condition with the name of my video one. And there you go, that's the output. Let's say we want to display the YouTube videos which have hits greater than 1000. What we are doing here is specifying the hits which are greater than 1000 and type of YouTube. And these are our results. If you notice, we had another entry which had hits of 1000, but that is not getting displayed. To prove that to you, I can remove this entry. All right. I'll clear the screen again. Now there are other ways to filter the data as well. Let's say we only want to display the names of all our videos. We would use this command. What I'm doing here is I'm dereferencing the array and I'm asking it to select only entries with .name. This is the result. If we want to add the .type to it, separate it with a comma and add .type. This doesn't look very good, does it? Let me clear the screen. Instead of the earlier command, let's try this one. Alright, what I'm doing here is I'm specifying the header name and specifying the actual object, which is .name, specifying another header of type with the object of .type. And this is the output. Now, if you do not want to see the colors, you can add the -m. M stands for monochrome. If you want to see all the options, specify the help, and this is what you get. So -m is for monochrome. Another useful option is R, which stands for raw strings. And that pretty much is all I have on JQ. Next up is Azure and jmespath. jmespath is a query language that allows you to search JSON documents. You can see this mentioned in the AZ CLI help output. This command lists the various VM sizes that you can select in Azure. I'm adding the help argument to it. As shown here, Azure CLI uses jmespath as the query language. jmespath is written as JMES, but it's pronounced as jmespath, as in King James. jmespath has similarities with JQ that we learned earlier. What I'll be showing you are the building blocks. Once you understand these, you should be able to construct complex queries on your own. Let's get started. What I'm doing here is listing the sizes in the West US region. And the output, as you can see, is an array with a number of elements which are objects. You can ignore this error. I've Googled it and it appears to be a known issue. Let's display the information within the array. Based on what we learned earlier, you might be tempted to add a dot to it, but if you do that, it will not work. What you'll need to do is not specify the dot. Remember, this is jmespath, this is not JQ. And now this displays the names of all the different options that we have. Next, let's use multi-select to display two entries, the name and the number of cores. This should look familiar because we've used this with JQ earlier. We are using multi-select to display the name and the cores. Let's tweak it further to display only the names that begin with standard_B. And we do that by using this construct. All right. We can make it look a little better. Let me show you how. With AZCLI, you can add an option of table which displays the information in a tabular format like this. Isn't this much better? Similarly, we can tweak the text to display any other name you want. Let's say E2AV4. There you go. Now, what if you want to display the names based on the number of cores? You might be tempted to try out something like this, but this will not work. What you need to try is something like this. What we are doing here is we are adding a backtick and we are preceding it with a backslash to prevent the shell from interpreting it. This appears to be a known bug. And there you go, that is the information. Finally, let's add the table output. Now, if you do not want to learn jmespath and you only want to learn JQ, I should point out that you can use JQ along with AZCLI. Let me show you how. What we are doing here is passing this information over to JQ. Since this command returns JSON output, JQ is able to parse it for us. And there you go, it's the same information as earlier, but this time it's been processed by JQ. Now on to Kubernetes. Just like in Azure, the Azure CLI uses jmespath. In Kubernetes, kubectl utility uses jsonpath. Let's try and learn some jsonpath basics. This site goes into some of the basics of jsonpath. We will attempt some of the commands that can be found here. When we run this command, it displays the pods and also the status of the pods. To get the same output with JSON, we can add the -o option, which stands for output, and we are specifying JSON. Okay, now to make it pretty, we can pipe it to JQ. And this is what it looks like. To display the same information using JSonPath, let's do this. kgetpo output JSonPath equals, in braces, I'm specifying at, and I'm piping it to JQ again. Okay, I made a typo. Let me fix it. There you go. Now both of these commands display the exact same information. To prove it to you, I'll do a word count of the lines, and I'll do the same for the previous command. Alright, the line count for both of them is 428, so it matches. I'll clear the screen so it's easier to see. Next, let's display information from only a select few columns. This is necessary because when you execute the kgetpods command, it only displays information from a select few columns. But when you run the same thing using JSON, it displays a lot more information. And the one that we are interested in is somewhere in here. So first you see we have items. Items is a list, and within items there is metadata, and within metadata there should be a name. There you go, there's a name. So let's try and display this information. I'll clear the screen again, and I'll specify JSonPath equals Alright, so we are dereferencing the array, and then we are specifying metadata.name. And this displays pod1. This is the same as specifying item 0. So when you don't specify an index, it defaults to the first item, which is item 0. And similarly, you can also display the second item, which is index of 1, and it tells you it's pod 2. All right. So the first entry was pod 1, the second one was pod 2. Now let's display all the entries. And in this case, it prints pod 1 and pod 2, which is what we would expect. Let's move on to another example. Let's look at the status. And the status displays a lot of things. Let's pipe it to JQ. And this is what it shows us. So the item of interest are these. So let's do status dot phase. Okay, it says running. Let's do status dot host IP, and then status dot pod IP. All right. Similarly, we can display the information for the second item, and this is what it displays. I'll clear the screen again. To print multiple columns, let's use this notation. This combination of square brackets with a comma is called the union operator, and this allows us to display multiple entries. The information is there, it's just not very clean. Now there is another way to achieve this, and that is using custom columns. Alright, this is so much cleaner. Let's add all the information here. And this way we can see the name of the pod, the status, the pod IP, and the host IP. Now compare this to kgetpods. Kgetpods displays this information, which is pretty much static. And in our case, using jsonpath, we built a custom display which gives us the pod IP, the host IP, and the name of the pod. I'll clear the screen again. Now let's try and see how to search for items, right? So in this case, within the items array, we are searching for a pod which has a name of pod 1. It displays a lot of information. Let's use JQ, and this is what it shows us. Let's pick one column, and that would be the metadata.name. And it displays pod 1. Alright, that is it. What we've learned in this video is the basic use of JQ, jmespath, and jsonpath. Many of these commands came in handy when I took the certification course in Azure and then also in Kubernetes. The most important takeaway from this video is the ability to pick certain columns from the JSON output and to print only those columns. The next level is the ability to search for information and then print them. I've discussed the very basics in this course, and I hope you found them useful. Thank you for watching. Bye.